My name is Clara. I'm 28 years old, and for my entire life, I've been the daughter my parents tolerated while they adored my brother. When I got engaged to the love of my life, Liam, they called our dream wedding venue a dilapidated piece of trash and a public embarrassment. They had absolutely no idea they were talking about their terrifying new billionaire boss's private mansion, or that he'd be standing right behind them when they finally saw it. If you've ever felt like you weren't good enough for your own family, take a moment to drop a comment about where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this story of status, secrets, and sweet revenge unfolds. Before I tell you about the wedding venue that nearly tore my family apart, you need to understand the foundation of our relationship, which was built on a simple, painful truth. In my parents' eyes, I was the reliable, responsible placeholder, and my younger brother Ethan was the star. Growing up, I was the quiet one, the one who found solace in art supplies and sketchbooks. I was a straight-A student, I followed the rules, and I worked part-time jobs through high school and college to pay for my own expenses. I put myself through design school with a combination of scholarships, loans, and working 3 jobs, graduating with honors and a fierce sense of independence born from necessity. My parents, Mark and Susan, were proud in a detached, checklist sort of way. Oh, Clara graduated. That's nice. Now she can get a real job and be self-sufficient. To them, my achievements were simply me, meeting the baseline expectation of not being a burden. There were no grand celebrations, no tearful speeches about how proud they were. It was a box ticked, a responsibility fulfilled. Ethan, on the other hand, was their masterpiece in progress. He was charming, handsome, and coasted through life on a wave of parental funding and lowered expectations. Every C- was a sign of a creative mind not bound by rigid structures. Every failed project was a valuable learning experience. They saw in him a reflection of the success and status they so desperately craved for themselves. They weren't wealthy, but they lived in a neighborhood that was, and they spent their lives trying to keep up with the Joneses, a performance for which Ethan was always the lead actor and I was a stagehand in the wings. The most glaring example of this disparity came when we both finished college. My graduation was a quiet affair. We went to a chain restaurant for dinner, where the conversation was dominated by Ethan's latest brilliant idea. He wanted to start a company selling artisanal, pH-balanced water sourced from a local spring, which was really just the tap in his apartment run through a fancy filter. I had just landed a competitive internship at a major design firm in the city, an achievement I was incredibly proud of. When I mentioned it, my father nodded absently and said, "Well, that's good. At least you'll have a steady paycheck." Then, he turned to Ethan, his eyes lighting up. "Son, about your business idea. Your mother and I have been talking. We think it has real potential. We're going to cash out some investments to give you the seed money you need." They gave him $50,000. $50,000. The business, predictably, folded in 6 months after he'd spent most of the money on a flashy logo, a company car he barely used, and expensive dinners to network. My parents chalked it up to bad market timing and told him how proud they were that he had tried. Meanwhile, I was commuting 2 hours each way on a crowded train to my internship, living off instant noodles and the sheer will to succeed. The car I drove was a 10-year-old Corolla I had bought with my own savings, a car my mother affectionately called the Tin Can. The year Ethan's water company failed, my parents bought him a brand new SUV because he needed something reliable and safe to get to his job interviews. It didn't matter that he didn't have any interviews lined up. It was about the image. This pattern repeated itself endlessly. When I got my first real apartment, I furnished it with secondhand items and celebrated by eating pizza on the floor. When Ethan decided to move out a year later, my parents co-signed a luxury apartment for him and paid for a professional interior decorator because, as my mother explained, it's important for a young man with his ambitions to have an impressive home base. I tried not to let it poison me. I focused on my work, built a solid portfolio, and slowly climbed the ladder at my firm. I had a close circle of friends who saw me for who I was, and my life was full. But a small part of me, The little girl who just wanted her parents to look at her with the same shining pride they had for her brother, never quite healed. I kept trying, showing up for every family dinner, remembering every birthday, offering to help them with anything they needed, tech support, yard work, running errands. I did it because they were my family, and I held on to a sliver of hope that one day they would finally see me. The dynamic became even more pronounced when I started dating Liam 2 years ago. Liam was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. He was a high school history teacher, a kind, intelligent, and deeply principled man who made me laugh every single day. He wasn't a CEO or a tech entrepreneur. He was just a good person doing meaningful work. When I introduced him to my parents, their smiles were polite but thin. I could almost hear the gears turning in their heads as they calculated his net worth. A teacher? That's noble, my father had said, the word hanging in the air like a polite insult. Does he have plans to move into administration? The real money is in being a principal, my mother had added, ever the pragmatist. They never truly warmed to him. They would ask him intrusive questions about his family's finances and offer unsolicited career advice. They compared him constantly to Ethan's girlfriend of the month, usually the daughter of some mid-level executive my parents were trying to impress. Through it all, Liam was a rock. He saw their behavior for what it was and never let it affect his love for me. "It's their loss, Clara," he would say, holding my hand. "They're so busy looking for glitter, they're missing the gold." I loved him for that, for seeing the gold in me when my own parents couldn't. I thought I had made peace with the situation, that I had accepted my role in the family hierarchy. I thought I could handle their casual dismissiveness and constant favoritism. I had built a life and a love that was separate from them, a world where I was valued. But I had no idea that my engagement, the happiest moment of my life, would be the very thing that would ignite this long smoldering injustice into an all-out war. The proposal was perfect. Liam took me to the botanical gardens on a crisp autumn afternoon, the air smelling of fallen leaves and damp earth. Under the branches of a century-old oak tree, with golden light filtering through the canopy, he got down on one knee. He didn't have a long, flowery speech. He just looked at me with so much love in his eyes that it took my breath away and said, "Clara, my life began the day I met you. Will you spend the rest of it with me?" Through happy tears, I said yes. The ring wasn't a massive, flashy diamond that my mother would have approved of. It was a beautiful, vintage-inspired sapphire, my birthstone, surrounded by delicate, entwined bands, a design he knew I would love because he actually listened to me. For the first time, I felt a future of unconditional love and acceptance crystallizing before me. That evening, we decided to tell our families. Liam's parents were overjoyed, welcoming me into the family with warm hugs and genuine excitement. They were both retired librarians, warm, funny people who valued books and kindness over brand names and bank accounts. Their reaction was a comforting balm to my soul before we made the call I was dreading. I put my phone on speaker, Liam's hand holding mine for support. "Mom, Dad, we have some wonderful news," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "Liam and I are engaged." There was a pause. Not a joyful, breathless pause, but a heavy, analytical one. "Engaged?" my mother said finally, her tone flat. "Oh, well, congratulations, I suppose. Is this something you've thought through, Clara?" my father asked, immediately jumping into interrogation mode. "Weddings are a significant financial undertaking. Is Liam prepared for that?" The joy I had felt just moments before began to curdle into the familiar ache of disappointment. They didn't ask about the proposal, the ring, or how I was feeling. Their first thoughts were about logistics and money. "We're prepared, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "We've both been saving, and we want something small and personal anyway." "Small can look cheap if you're not careful," my mother warned. "You have to consider the optics, Clara. A wedding is a reflection on the entire family. It's the first major event since Ethan launched his last startup. The comparison was inevitable, a reflex they couldn't control. The conversation ended a few minutes later with their lukewarm congratulations and a promise to discuss the practicalities soon. When I hung up, I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. Liam pulled me into a hug. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "It's okay," I lied, burying my face in his chest. "I'm used to it." But it wasn't okay. This was supposed to be different. The wedding planning began, and with it, my parents' campaign of unsolicited advice and thinly veiled criticism. They wanted us to get married at the local country club, a stuffy, overpriced venue that was the epitome of their social climbing aspirations. They wanted a guest list filled with their business associates and neighbors I barely knew. They wanted a traditional, ostentatious affair that was a complete departure from the intimate, nature-filled celebration Liam and I envisioned. We wanted a place with character, somewhere that felt like us. I spent weeks searching online, looking for something unique. And then, I found it. Or rather, it found me. A few months prior, I had done some pro bono design work for a small, underfunded animal shelter. I had redesigned their logo, website, and all their fundraising materials, simply because I loved their mission. I never expected anything in return. About a week after our engagement, I received an email from a name I didn't recognize, Alistair Blackwood. The email was brief and formal. He said he was the primary benefactor of the shelter, had seen my work, and was incredibly impressed by both my talent and my generosity. He had heard through the shelter's director that I was recently engaged, and, as a token of his gratitude, he wanted to offer his private estate as a potential wedding venue, free of charge. I was stunned. I did some research and found that Alistair Blackwood was a reclusive, almost mythical billionaire who had made his fortune in tech and was now a silent philanthropist. There were almost no photos of him online. His estate, known simply as Blackwood Manor, was a historic property hidden away on hundreds of acres of protected forest, and it was not open to the public. It was a place of legend, whispered about but rarely seen. He invited Liam and me for a private tour. The estate was breathtaking. A long, winding drive led to a magnificent stone manor that looked like something out of a fairy tale, surrounded by sprawling gardens, ancient trees, and a serene, private lake. It was elegant, timeless, and deeply connected to nature, everything we had ever dreamed of. Mr. Blackwood himself was a quiet, dignified older gentleman who treated us with incredible kindness. He showed us around, pointed out the perfect spot for an outdoor ceremony by the lake, and told us the place was ours for our wedding weekend if we wanted it. We accepted on the spot, overwhelmed with gratitude. It felt like a miracle, a reward for staying true to myself. I was ecstatic. I had found our perfect, magical, once-in-a-lifetime venue, but in my parents' eyes, I had just signed the social death warrant for our entire family. When I first told my parents I had found a venue, I was so full of excitement that I naively thought they might share in my joy. I decided to keep Mr. Blackwood's identity a secret, wanting the focus to be on the beauty of the place, not the owner's wealth. I simply told them it was a private estate offered to us by a benefactor of a charity I had worked with. The phone call was a disaster. "A private estate?" my mother said, the skepticism dripping from her voice. "Whose estate, Clara? Is it someone we know? What's it called?" "It's called Blackwood Manor," I said cheerfully. "It's absolutely stunning. It's surrounded by forests and has this beautiful lake." "Blackwood Manor?" she interrupted. "Never heard of it. Is it even a real venue? Or is it just some old farmhouse someone rents out on the weekends? It sounds rustic." In her vocabulary, rustic was synonymous with poor. "It's not a farmhouse, Mom. It's a historic manor. You'll love it when you see it." "We'll see," she said, her tone making it clear she had already made up her mind. "I just hope you haven't put a deposit down on some dilapidated barn in the middle of nowhere. Think of the pictures, Clara. Think of the impression it will make." That was only the beginning. A few days later, they ambushed me and Liam at a coffee shop. They came armed with glossy brochures for the Northgate Country Club. "We just wanted you to see what a real wedding venue looks like," my father said, spreading the pictures across our small table. They showed sterile ballrooms with gaudy chandeliers and perfectly manicured golf courses. "This is class, Clara. This is timeless. This is what people will respect." "We appreciate you thinking of us," Liam said politely but firmly, placing his hand over mine. But Clara and I have already found a place that we love, and that's what matters to us. My father's jaw tightened. He had never liked being contradicted. What matters is setting yourself up for success. A wedding is a networking opportunity. The people you meet, the connections you make. You're a teacher, Liam. You might not understand this, but in the real world, these things are important. The condescension was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. Dad, we're not choosing our wedding venue based on networking potential, I said, my patience wearing thin. We're choosing it based on what feels right for us. What feels right isn't always what is right, my mother chimed in, her voice taking on a martyred tone. We just want what's best for you. We don't want you to look back in 10 years and be embarrassed by your wedding photos. The attacks became a constant drumbeat in the weeks that followed. They would send me links to articles about tacky wedding trends to avoid. They would make passive-aggressive comments during family phone calls. Oh, Ethan's friend just got married at the Four Seasons, my mom would say. The pictures were divine. Everyone was there. It was a real society event. The implication was always clear. Their wedding was a success. Mine was destined to be a failure. My mother tried a different tactic one afternoon, calling me for a heart-to-heart. Sweetheart, she began, her voice syrupy sweet. I'm worried about you. I think this benefactor is taking advantage of your good nature. Offering a venue for free? It sounds too good to be true. There must be a catch. What if the place is falling apart? What if the plumbing doesn't work? We just don't want to see you get hurt, or worse, humiliated on your big day. It was a masterful performance of manipulation, dressing up her snobbery as maternal concern. She wasn't worried about my happiness. She was worried about her own reputation. She was terrified of her friends seeing her daughter get married at a place that wasn't on their approved list of status symbols. I've seen the venue, Mom, I said, my voice tired. It's perfect. And the owner is an incredibly kind and private person who simply wanted to do something nice for me. Private is often code for has something to hide, she sniffed. Just promise me you'll think about it. The country club is still holding a date for us. I was starting to question my own sanity. Was I being unreasonable? Was I so blinded by the beauty of the manor that I was missing some obvious flaw? Their constant criticism was like water torture, a slow, steady drip of doubt that was beginning to erode my confidence. That weekend, I met my best friend Maya for brunch and poured out the whole story. Maya had been my rock since college. She was a no-nonsense lawyer who had no patience for pretense. She listened intently, her expression growing stormier with every word. When I finished, she put her fork down and looked me straight in the eye. Clara, she said, her voice firm. This has nothing to do with the venue. You could have chosen the Palace of Versailles and they would have found something to criticize because it wasn't their choice. This is about control. They have controlled the family narrative your entire life, with Ethan as the hero and you as the supporting character. You are finally writing your own story, and they can't stand it. Her words were like a splash of cold water. She was right. This wasn't about floral arrangements or catering choices. It was a power struggle. I had spent my life trying to earn their approval, molding myself into the daughter I thought they wanted. By choosing my own path, my own partner, and my own venue, I was breaking a pattern that had been in place for 28 years. And they were panicking. They're being cruel, Clara, Maya continued, her voice softening. They're not concerned, they're condescending. Don't let them ruin this for you. This wedding is about you and Liam. Period. Leaving brunch that day, I felt a renewed sense of resolve. Maya had given me the validation I needed. My feelings were real. The situation was unhealthy. I decided then and there that I was done trying to manage their feelings. I would be polite, but I would not engage in any more debates about the venue. I sent my parents a brief, firm email that night. Mom, Dad, I wrote. Liam and I are incredibly happy with our choice of venue, and the decision is final. We would love for you to be a part of our day and celebrate with us, but we will not be discussing the location any further. We hope you can respect that. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought setting a boundary would force them to back down, but I had severely underestimated how far they would go to get their way. They were doubling down, and I could feel something big and ugly was on the horizon. I just didn't realize it would happen in front of our entire extended family, or that it would be the moment that shattered any hope of a peaceful resolution. The breaking point came, as it so often did in our family, at an event meticulously designed to celebrate my father but engineered to broadcast their social standing. It was his 60th birthday, and they had reserved a private dining room at the Chancellor's Grill, a ridiculously overpriced steakhouse where the steaks were less important than the CEOs sitting at the next table. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, aged leather, and the strained murmur of people performing success. Liam and I were seated at the far end of the long, polished mahogany table, a deliberate piece of social geography. We were in the cheap seats, placed there to observe the spectacle without contaminating it with our more modest reality. It was a position I knew well. Ethan, of course, was at the head of the table, seated to my father's right, the place of honor. He was in his element, regaling a rapt audience of my father's colleagues with a long, rambling story about a recent golf outing where he'd supposedly exchanged a few words with a minor local news anchor. My parents watched him, their faces glowing with a pride so intense it was almost blinding. It wasn't just love, it was validation. Ethan was their stock, and it was soaring. They hung on his every word, laughing a little too loudly, nodding a little too eagerly. It was a performance, and he was their star. I tried to tune it out, focusing on a polite but strained conversation with my Aunt Carol about her gardenias. She was a kind woman, one of the few relatives who seemed to see me as a person rather than a project. But even her gentle presence couldn't shield me from the oppressive atmosphere of judgment. I could feel my parents' eyes on me, their gazes like lasers, sharp and critical. My email setting a boundary had not created a truce. It had been interpreted as an act of rebellion, and tonight was clearly meant to be my punishment. After the main courses were cleared, my father stood, his posture ramrod straight, and tapped his steak knife against a crystal water glass. The room fell silent. "I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate this milestone with me," he began, his voice resonating with the false bonhomie of a practiced public speaker. He spoke of his career, of his gratitude for his wonderful colleagues. He thanked my mother for being his rock. Then, his eyes landed on Ethan, and his face softened into that familiar expression of adoration. They say a man is only as successful as his legacy, the values he passes on. And Ethan, he said, his voice swelling with emotion, watching you build your life, your career, your network, it makes me prouder than you can ever know. You've always understood the importance of making smart choices, of aiming high. You know that you can't build a future on ideals alone. You need capital and connections. You never, ever settle for second best. He raised his glass to Ethan, who practically glowed under the spotlight of paternal approval. Every word was a perfectly calibrated insult, a missile launched from across the table with me as the intended target. Aiming high, smart choices, never settling. He hadn't said my name, but he didn't have to. The comparison was stark, brutal, and public. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck, and I stared intently at the crumbs on my bread plate, willing myself not to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. But he wasn't done. His gaze swiveled to me, his expression shifting to one of theatrical disappointment, a look he had perfected over years of expressing his disapproval of my life choices. "Of course," he continued, his tone now heavy with meaning, "parenthood is all about hope. You hope your children learn the lessons you teach them. You hope they value the family's reputation above all else. You hope they understand that the choices they make, the partners they choose, the events they plan reflect on all of us." The silence in the room was now thick and uncomfortable. He was putting me on trial in front of an audience of his peers, and my crime was wanting a wedding that was my own. As if on cue, my mother saw her opening. She reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone with a flourish. "Oh, speaking of beautiful choices," she chirped, her voice bright and brittle, "I just have to show you all a photo from Bethany's wedding last month." Bethany was the daughter of my dad's colleague, a girl I had met twice in my life. She married Ethan's friend, you remember? A lovely boy. His father is on the board at the bank. They had it at the Northgate Country Club. She began passing her phone around the table, a curated slideshow of a perfectly nice, if completely soulless, wedding. Look at that ballroom. The elegance. The sheer class. It was just a spectacular event. A real A-plus affair. The sort of thing you're proud to be associated with. When the phone reached my Aunt Carol, she glanced at it for a fraction of a second, offered a tight-lipped, "Lovely," and passed it on, pointedly avoiding my gaze. She knew what this was. Everyone did. It was a public execution of my taste, my choices, my life. My mother's message was as subtle as a sledgehammer. This is a success. This is acceptable. You are not. I felt Liam's hand find mine under the table, his grip so firm it was almost painful. It was an anchor in a swirling sea of humiliation. I looked up at him, and the protective fury in his eyes on my behalf was so fierce it momentarily chased away my own shame. He loved me. That was real. This was just noise. The final, fatal blow came from my father. As my mother retrieved her phone, he leaned back in his chair, sighed as if bearing a great burden, and said, his voice carrying easily across the hushed table, "Frankly, we're embarrassed by Clara's plans. This whole affair with this mysterious free venue. It's tacky, and it makes us look like we can't provide for our own daughter. If you go through with this, don't expect us to bring any of our important friends. We simply can't risk our reputation on such a questionable event." And there it was, the unvarnished truth, stripped of all pretense of concern. It wasn't about my happiness, it was about their reputation, their image, their fragile social standing, built on a foundation of country club memberships and luxury car leases. In their relentless pursuit of status, my joy was not just irrelevant, it was a liability. In that instant, something inside me didn't just break, it vaporized. The part of me that had spent 28 years pathetically hoping for a crumb of their approval, the part that twisted itself into knots trying to be worthy of the love they gave my brother so freely it just ceased to exist. It was replaced by a cold, clear, and utterly unfamiliar calm, the calm of finality. I squeezed Liam's hand back, a silent thank you. Then I stood up, my movements fluid and unhurried. The room was silent, all eyes on me. "Thank you for dinner, Dad." "Happy birthday," I said, my voice as steady and cool as a frozen lake. "Liam and I have to be going now." "We're not finished, Clara," my father sputtered, his face flushing with anger at being defied. "Oh, I think we are," I said, looking him directly in the eye, letting him see the absence of the hurt little girl he was so used to. "I've heard everything I need to hear tonight. We are more than finished." Without another word, we turned and walked out of the private room, leaving a stunned, gaping silence in our wake. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I felt nothing but the clean, sharp relief of a chain being broken. They had meant to humiliate me into submission. Instead, they had inadvertently, gloriously, set me free. They had drawn their line in the sand. And as Liam and I walked into the cool night air, I decided it was time to show them that their line was drawn on property they couldn't even fathom, owned by a man whose shoes they weren't worthy of polishing. The game had changed, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to play to win. The drive home from the restaurant was enveloped in a profound silence, but it wasn't an empty one. It was the charged, purposeful silence of a storm-gathering force just over the horizon. The city lights blurred past my window, a chaotic symphony of color, but inside my mind, everything was sharp and still. The humiliation had acted like a furnace, burning away decades of fog, doubt, and the desperate need for their approval. Now, all that remained was a cold, hard clarity. Liam, bless his heart, sensed the tectonic shift within me. He just drove, one hand resting on the console near mine, a silent, steady presence. He knew I didn't need comforting. I needed a moment to let the new, stronger version of myself settle into her skin. When we got back to our apartment, the first thing I did was kick off my shoes. I felt like I was shedding a costume. Liam made me a cup of chamomile tea, and as I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, I finally told him the full story, the secret I had been holding back, thinking it would be a delightful surprise rather than a strategic weapon. "The venue," I said. my voice devoid of the waver it usually held when I spoke of my parents. It's not just some random estate owned by a kind philanthropist. It belongs to Alistair Blackwood. Liam's eyes widened, the name registering instantly. Everyone in the city knew the name. It was whispered in business circles with a mixture of terror and awe. The Alistair Blackwood? The reclusive tech billionaire? How in the world did that happen, Clara? I recounted the whole story in detail, the hours I'd spent creating a new brand identity for the struggling animal shelter, the unexpected email from a name I didn't recognize, the formal yet kind invitation, and the breathtaking tour of the estate. I described how Mr. Blackwood had been a perfect gentleman, more interested in the story of a stray dog I had helped name than in talking about himself. He had made it clear his offer was a personal gesture of gratitude, a quiet acknowledgement of character, not a transaction. I kept his identity a secret, because I was so foolish, I admitted, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. I wanted them to love the place for its soul, for its beauty, for what it meant to us. I wanted them to see past a brand name for once in their lives. I should have known better. The only thing they respect, the only thing they understand, is a brand name. Liam shook his head, a slow, wondrous smile spreading across his face. He got up from his chair and started pacing the living room, buzzing with a new energy. Clara, this isn't foolish. This is poetic. This is the most beautiful, karmic checkmate situation I have ever heard of in my entire life. And then I delivered the final piece of the puzzle. The detail that would elevate this from a simple family comeuppance to a high-stakes corporate nightmare for my parents. There's more, I said, my voice dropping. Remember how Dad has been complaining for weeks about the Sterling Corp acquisition? How everyone at his company and Mom's is terrified of the new, faceless corporate overlords who are coming in to trim the fat. I pulled up a business news article on my laptop, one I'd bookmarked a few weeks ago. I turned the screen towards him. The headline was stark, unambiguous. Blackwood Industries finalizes hostile takeover of Sterling Corp and Alistair Blackwood to assume direct oversight. Liam stopped pacing. He stared at the screen, then back at me, his jaw literally agape. You have got to be kidding me. He's their new boss? Not just a boss, but the boss? The man who decides who stays and who gets a cardboard box? The one and only, I confirmed, a grim satisfaction settling in. From what I've pieced together from their complaints, he's a phantom. No one has met him. He communicates through severe, formal memos about efficiency, integrity, and a zero-tolerance policy for reputational risk. My parents have been working themselves to the bone, trying to impress a man they've never seen, a man whose private home they have been publicly, viciously, and repeatedly calling a dilapidated piece of trash. We sat there for a long moment, the sheer, magnificent irony of it all hanging in the air. My parents were bowing to a king while spitting on his castle, and they had no idea. You have to tell them, Liam said finally, his voice full of awe. No, I replied, a plan crystallizing in my mind, sharp and perfect in its simplicity. No, telling them now lets them off the hook. It gives them a chance to grovel, to backtrack, to invent a story about how they were just testing me. I'm so tired of their words. For once, I want them to face the consequences of their actions. In real time, with no escape. The plan was simple, elegant, and designed for maximum impact. The wedding is in 2 weeks, I laid out, feeling like a general planning a counter-offensive. Next Saturday, the day before the ceremony, I am going to call them. I'm going to sound broken. I'm going to tell them that the stress has gotten to me, that I realize they're right, and that I need them to come with me for one last, painful look at the venue before I officially cancel it and beg the country club for mercy. Liam was already grinning, his initial shock transforming into enthusiastic support. You're going to lure them there. A Trojan horse. Exactly, I said. I'm going to let them walk onto that magnificent property, drunk on their own smug self-satisfaction, ready to deliver the killing blow. I want them to stand on that immaculate lawn, surrounded by beauty they are too blind to appreciate, and I want them to say one more time how tacky and embarrassing it all is. And then, Liam prompted, his eyes gleaming. And then, I said, feeling a thrill of righteous power that was entirely new to me, Mr. Blackwood is going to emerge from his dilapidated house to greet the young designer he so admires, and I am going to have the distinct pleasure of introducing my parents to their new boss. The next day, I set the plan in motion. The most nerve-wracking part was contacting Mr. Blackwood's office. I called his personal assistant, a crisp, professional woman named Miss Evans. My heart was pounding as I explained the situation, phrasing it as diplomatically as possible. I spoke of a complex family dynamic and a deep desire to have my parents appreciate the profound generosity of Mr. Blackwood's offer in a uniquely memorable way. Miss Evans was silent for a moment, and I was sure I had overstepped. Then, I heard a sound that might have been a suppressed chuckle. "Mr. Blackwood was very moved by your selflessness with the shelter, Miss Miller," she said, her voice now holding a distinct warmth. "He is a great believer in character. He also has, shall we say, a very low tolerance for arrogance and entitlement. Let me speak with him. I believe he may find your meaningful introduction to be a very worthwhile endeavor." She called back an hour later. Her voice was pure business, but I could hear a smile in it. "Mr. Blackwood would be delighted to personally greet you and your parents next Saturday at 2 p.m. sharp," she confirmed. "He looks forward to meeting the family of the designer whose integrity he so admires." The stage was set. For the next 2 weeks, I gave the performance of a lifetime. I became the defeated daughter. I was quiet and withdrawn on the phone. I let their condescendingly sympathetic comments, "You'll thank us one day, dear," hang in the air, meeting them with only meek one-word replies. On the Saturday before the wedding, I made the call, carefully pitching my voice to sound fragile and on the verge of tears. "Mom, Dad," I whispered into the phone, "I can't do this anymore." You were right. All of it. I was being stubborn and emotional. "I think I've made a terrible mistake. Can you please come with me to the venue this afternoon? I have to tell the owner I'm canceling, and I'm honestly terrified to do it alone." The triumphant satisfaction in my mother's voice was a physical thing. I could almost feel it through the phone. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll be right there. Don't you worry. You're finally doing the right thing. We'll fix this." The actors were in place. The trap was laid. All that was left was to raise the curtain on the final, devastating act of their own tragedy. My parents arrived at my apartment precisely at 1:30 p.m., their punctuality a testament to their eagerness to witness my final surrender. They were dressed for the occasion. My father wore a crisp, navy blue polo shirt and a smug, self-satisfied expression that he probably thought looked paternal. My mother was clad in a beige designer pantsuit that screamed tasteful superiority, her face a carefully constructed mask of triumphant sympathy. They weren't here to support me. They were here to collect on their emotional victory. "Oh, Clara, I'm so proud of you for finally seeing reason," my mother said, patting my arm in a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt deeply patronizing. "It takes a very big person to admit when they're wrong." All right, let's just get this over with," my father said brusquely, already glancing at his Rolex. "The sooner you cancel this disaster, the sooner we can get on the phone with the country club and see if they can salvage this wedding. We'll have to pull some strings, of course." I nodded meekly, keeping my eyes downcast, channeling every ounce of my acting ability into the role of the chastened daughter. "Thank you both for coming. It's just a bit off the beaten path. I should probably drive." The car ride was an agonizing 30-minute symphony of their gloating. They dissected every imaginary flaw of my failed plan with the precision of surgeons, all while ostensibly trying to make me feel better. "Honestly, it's probably for the best that it's in such a remote location," my father mused as we turned off the main highway onto a smaller, beautifully maintained road lined with ancient, sprawling trees. "Fewer guests means fewer witnesses to the embarrassment." "And that name, Blackwood Manor," my mother scoffed, shuddering theatrically. "It sounds so dreary, like something out of a cheap Gothic novel where everyone gets consumption. I can just picture the peeling wallpaper and the musty smell." I just gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white, and focused on my breathing, the rhythm steady and calm. "Just a little longer," I told myself. "Let them build their own pyre. We finally reached the entrance to the estate. It was intentionally, magnificently understated, a simple, elegant iron gate flanked by two massive, moss-covered stone pillars. There was no gaudy sign, no nameplate, nothing to announce the immense wealth that lay beyond. It was the quiet confidence of old money. "Oh, look," my father said with a sarcastic chuckle that echoed in the car. "A rusty gate. Very on brand for a rustic. I hope we don't need a tetanus shot to get in." I said nothing. I simply reached out and pressed a code into a small, discreet keypad. The gates, which were not rusty but made of hand-forged, artfully weathered iron, swung open as silently as a passing shadow. They revealed a long, winding driveway paved with smooth, gray cobblestones, the kind that cost more per square foot than the flooring in my parents' house. The driveway was a tunnel through a cathedral of nature, flanked by rows of towering oak trees whose branches formed a majestic canopy overhead. The car fell utterly, completely silent. The smug commentary died on their lips. My mother, who had been scrolling dismissively through her phone, looked up. Her perfectly lipsticked mouth fell slightly ajar. "What? What is this?" she whispered as we drove deeper into the property. The landscape unfolded around us like a painting, perfectly manicured lawns that rolled gently towards the horizon, dotted with artful arrangements of wildflowers and elegant, abstract sculptures. "This is the driveway," I said, my voice neutral. As we rounded a final, sweeping curve, the manor itself came into view, and it was a revelation. It wasn't a dreary Gothic house. It was a breathtaking masterpiece of warm stone and shimmering glass, built into the side of a gentle hill as if it had grown there organically. It was grand but not ostentatious, a perfect, harmonious blend of historic architecture and clean, modern elegance. Water from 3 tiers of fountains danced and sparkled in the afternoon sun, and beyond the vast stone patio, I could see the impossibly blue, shimmering expanse of a private lake. My father, who had been the self-appointed expert on class just moments before, was rendered completely, profoundly speechless. He was just staring, his jaw slack, his face a comical mask of disbelief. "Clara, where are we?" my mother finally managed to ask, her voice a strained, reedy thing. "This can't be it. This isn't the trashy venue you described." "I never described it as trashy, Mom." "You did," I said, pulling the car to a stop in the circular drive before the main entrance. I turned off the engine, and the only sound was the gentle splashing of the fountains. "This is it. This is Blackwood Manor." I got out of the car, leaving them to stumble out after me, looking around like bewildered peasants who had accidentally wandered into the king's private gardens. "But this is impossible," my father stammered, his eyes fixed on the intricate, hand-carved details of the manor's stonework. "A place like this must have cost a fortune. Who owns a place like this?" And at that exact, perfectly timed moment, as if summoned by a divine director, the massive, dark oak doors of the manor opened. A man stepped out onto the top step. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a full head of silver hair and eyes that were a startlingly intelligent blue. He was dressed not in a flashy suit, but in simple, impeccably tailored linen trousers and a soft, dark gray cashmere sweater. He radiated an aura of quiet, unshakable authority, the kind of power that has no need to announce itself. He smiled warmly, a genuine smile that reached his eyes as he walked towards me. "Clara," he said, his voice calm, cultured, and carrying easily in the still air. "It's wonderful to see you. I trust your final preparations for the big day are going well?" "They are. Thank you so much, Mr. Blackwood," I replied, my voice steady and clear. Then, I turned to my stunned, frozen parents. "Mom, Dad, I'd like you to meet the owner of the estate, the benefactor I told you about. This is Mr. Alistair Blackwood." I watched, with a kind of detached fascination, as the color physically drained from their faces. The name, spoken aloud in this impossible, terrifying context, hit them like a physical blow. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, a gesture of pure, unadulterated horror. My father looked as if he had been struck by lightning. I could see the frantic, panicked calculations happening behind their eyes as the two halves of their world, their social aspirations, and their corporate fears collided in a spectacular explosion. Blackwood? My father choked out, his voice a strangled, pathetic squeak. As in, Blackwood? Industries? Mr. Blackwood's polite smile didn't waver, but his eyes were sharp, analytical, missing nothing. He extended a hand towards my father. That's correct. Mark, isn't it? And Susan, I've been reviewing the executive profiles from the Sterling Corp acquisition. It's a pleasure to finally meet you both in person. My father took his hand weakly, his own hand trembling like a leaf. His handshake was limp, defeated. My mother could only manage a pathetic little nod, her body rigid with shock. Mr. Blackwood then turned his attention back to me, placing a gentle, paternal hand on my shoulder. I must say, Mark, Susan, you are very lucky to have such a talented and kind-hearted daughter. When I saw the design work Clara did for the animal shelter pro bono, I might add, completely out of the goodness of her heart, I knew she was a person of rare character. I was truly honored to offer my home for her and Liam's wedding. He paused, letting the words sink in, before looking back at my parents, his gaze now holding a glint of polished steel. I'm looking forward to getting to know my new executive team better in the coming weeks. I've always found that integrity, loyalty, and most importantly, good judgment are the most valuable assets in any employee. I'm sure you both agree. It was a masterfully delivered kill shot, wrapped in the silken glove of politeness. He was praising me for the very qualities of character they had mocked, and simultaneously issuing a clear, chilling threat about their own professional futures. He was telling them, in the most civilized way imaginable, that he knew exactly who they were, and he was not impressed. They stood there, utterly broken, frozen in a tableau of pure horror. The arrogance, the condescension, the snobbery it had all evaporated, replaced by the raw, primal fear of people who have just realized they have insulted a god. I decided it was time for the final curtain call. Well, I said, my voice bright and clear, cutting through the thick silence. I just wanted you both to have one last look before the big day tomorrow. I do hope you like the dilapidated piece of trash now that you've seen it up close. I smiled, the sweetest, most innocent smile I could muster. The ceremony is by the lake tomorrow at 4 p.m. Whether you choose to come as my proud parents or not is, of course, entirely up to you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go help Liam with the seating chart. Mr. Blackwood, it was so lovely to see you again. I turned and walked away, up the stone steps and into the magnificent manor, leaving them standing there, pale and silent, in the long, terrifying shadow of the mansion they had so viciously and foolishly condemned. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The war was over, and I had won. The walk from the circular drive to the manor's grand entrance felt like crossing a finish line I had been running towards my entire life. I didn't feel a rush of triumphant glee or a desire to gloat. What I felt was a profound, bone-deep sense of peace. The heavy, suffocating cloak of their expectations, a garment I had worn for 28 years, had finally been lifted. Inside, Liam was pacing in the grand foyer, his face a mask of anxious anticipation. The moment he saw me, he rushed forward. How did it go? Did they come? What did they say? He asked, taking both of my hands in his. I just smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached my eyes and crinkled the corners. A smile free of tension and performance. Checkmate, I said softly. My phone, which I'd left in my purse in the foyer, started ringing less than 10 minutes later. The caller ID flashed. Mom. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, a text message appeared. Clara, please pick up. We need to talk. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. I showed the text to Liam, and we both broke into a quiet, incredulous laugh. A misunderstanding? A 6-month campaign of dedicated psychological warfare was now a misunderstanding. It was followed in quick succession by a text from my father, his tone a desperate pivot from arrogance to subservience. I think we got off on the wrong foot. Mr. Blackwood seems like a very reasonable man. We'd love to discuss our contribution to the wedding budget. I put my phone on silent and turned it face down on a polished antique table. For the rest of the evening, as we finalized the last-minute details with the wedding planner, who was a model of efficiency and calm, it buzzed incessantly. It was a frantic, desperate rhythm against the wood, the vibration of a world being turned upside down. With every buzz, I felt another link in the chain breaking. That night, in the beautiful guest suite Mr. Blackwood had provided for us, I slept a deep, dreamless sleep for the first time in months. I was free. The weight of their judgment, a burden so constant I had forgotten what it felt like to not carry it, was finally gone. My wedding day dawned bright and perfect. It was one of those magical autumn days where the air is crisp and the sunlight is the color of honey. The gardens of Blackwood Manor were spectacular, and the spot by the lake where we would exchange our vows looked like a scene from a movie. My bridesmaids, my best friend Maya among them, surrounded me with so much genuine love and infectious joy that there was no room for even a shadow of negativity. For the first time, I didn't know if my parents would show up to a major event in my life, and the most shocking part was realizing that a huge part of me didn't care. My happiness was no longer contingent on their attendance or their approval. But they did come. They slipped into the last row of white chairs, just as the string quartet began to play, almost as if they were trying to be invisible. They looked diminished. The entitled arrogance that had always been their armor was gone, replaced by a quiet, nervous humility. My father's expensive suit, usually worn with such pride, looked ill-fitting on his slumped shoulders. My mother's perfectly coiffed hair seemed to have lost its defiant volume. They didn't approach me before the ceremony. They didn't dare. They just watched from a distance, their faces pale and unreadable. During the reception, which was held in a magnificent glass conservatory that glittered under the stars, they were models of anxious decorum. They were excessively polite to everyone, their smiles tight and fixed. They complimented the food, the music, the floral arrangements, their praise sounding hollow and rehearsed. When my father was called upon to give his toast, it was a completely different speech from the one at his birthday dinner. It was short, stilted, and filled with the kind of vague, generic platitudes you'd find on a greeting card. "May their life together be as beautiful as this stunning setting," he concluded, raising his glass, his eyes darting nervously towards the head table, where Mr. Blackwood sat observing everything with a quiet, knowing amusement. Mr. Blackwood, for his part, was the perfect host, mingling graciously with our guests. He made a point, multiple times, to tell anyone who would listen what a remarkable and principled young woman I was. Every word of praise he gave me, every compliment on my impeccable taste, was another nail in the coffin of my parents' carefully curated social identity. The most telling moment came when my brother Ethan, who had been blissfully unaware of the corporate drama and was simply in awe of the venue, cornered me by the towering wedding cake. "Wow, Clara. I don't know how you did it, but you really pulled it out of the bag with this place," he said, his voice full of genuine, uncomplicated admiration. "How did you possibly afford it?" Before I could formulate an answer, my mother swooped in, her face tight with a forced smile that didn't reach her terrified eyes. "Your sister's a very talented and resourceful woman, Ethan," she said, her voice strained and unnaturally high. "We are so, so proud of her." It was the first time in my adult life she had said those words to me with anything resembling conviction, and it was only because she was performing for an audience of one, a man whose opinion now meant more than anything in the world to her. Liam and I left for our honeymoon in Italy the next morning. For 2 glorious weeks, we explored the cobblestone streets of Rome, ate pasta in Florence, and watched the sunset over the Amalfi Coast. We were completely disconnected from the drama, the expectations, and the noise back home. I felt lighter than I had in years. The constant, low-level anxiety that had been the background music of my life had finally faded to silence. I was married to the man I loved, a man who saw and valued the real me. I had stood up for myself, not with anger, but with quiet, unshakable truth. I had created a life that was finally, truly, my own. The wedding was over, but I knew the real work of building a new relationship with my parents, or deciding if I even wanted one, was just beginning. The power had shifted irrevocably. but the future was still an unwritten page. 10 months. It doesn't sound like a long time, but in the 10 months since our wedding, the entire landscape of my life has been redrawn. The person I was on that sunny afternoon by the lake, the woman who had just discovered the formidable strength she held, feels like a distant, braver version of the person I am now. Not because that strength has faded, but because it has settled. It's no longer a weapon I have to wield. It's just part of my foundation. The past 10 months have been less about dramatic confrontations and more about the quiet, steady, and deeply satisfying work of building a life on that new foundation of self-respect. My graphic design business, which for years had been a passionate side hustle I squeezed into evenings and weekends, has exploded. It turns out that having a reclusive, integrity-obsessed billionaire as a vocal reference can open a few doors. Mr. Blackwood was so pleased with the discretion and elegance of our wedding and, I suspect, so amused by the entire situation with my parents that he personally recommended me to the heads of several of his philanthropic foundations. The work snowballed. I was able to quit my corporate job 6 months ago, a moment that felt as liberating as walking out of that restaurant. I now run my own studio full-time. We have a small, dedicated team of 2 other designers, and we get to be selective, taking on projects for nonprofits and arts organizations that are both creatively challenging and personally meaningful. Liam and I bought our first home 3 months ago. It's a charming little 1,940 seconds bungalow with a crooked porch and a big sun-drenched garden, just a short bike ride from the high school where he teaches. It's not a mansion, and it will never be featured in a magazine, but it's ours. We spent weeks painting the walls a warm, creamy white and stripping the old hardwood floors. It's filled with a chaotic mix of second-hand furniture, towering stacks of books, laughter, and the near-constant smell of Liam's questionable cooking experiments. It's a home built on a foundation of love and partnership, not on the desperate need for external validation. My relationship with my parents has undergone a slow, awkward, and ongoing transformation. The raw fear they felt on my wedding day eventually subsided, but it was replaced by a kind of bewildered, cautious respect. They don't understand my world, a world where I'd rather design a gala invitation for a soup kitchen than a logo for a hedge fund, but they no longer mock it. The power dynamic has been permanently rewired. They know, with absolute certainty, that I don't need them. Not for their money, not for their approval, and certainly not for their social connections. And that knowledge, that total absence of leverage, has ironically made them want to be in my life more than ever before. They come over for dinner once a month. The conversations are stilted at times, but they are different. They ask about my work, and they actually listen to the answers. Their brows furrowed in concentration as I talk about brand identity and user experience. They treat Liam not as a noble teacher, but as a smart, funny, and capable son-in-law. They see the genuine, uncomplicated happiness in our lives. A happiness that has nothing to do with country clubs or corporate ladders, and it seems to both confuse and intrigue them. They are trying, in their own clumsy, unfamiliar way, to learn a new language, one where value is measured in joy, not in dollars and status symbols. The most significant change, however, has been in their relationship with Ethan. About 4 months ago, his latest can't-miss venture, a subscription box for luxury, gluten-free dog toys, went bankrupt in a spectacularly fast flameout. In the past, this would have been their cue to swoop in with a checkbook, a comforting speech about learning experiences, and a down payment on a new car to cheer him up. This time, they didn't. I learned later from Aunt Carol that my father sat Ethan down in his study and had the hardest, most honest conversation of his life. He told Ethan that he loved him, but that the bank of Mom and Dad was permanently closed. He told him it was time to get a real job, to learn the value of earning your own way, to experience the dignity of standing on your own 2 feet. Ethan was, by all accounts, furious at first. He accused them of abandoning him, but after a few months of floundering, faced with the stark reality of rent being due, he did just that. He now works in sales for a mid-level software company. He hates it, but he's paying his own bills for the first time in his adult life. Our relationship, Ethan's and mine, has thawed as well. Without the constant pressure of the family hierarchy, we've started to see each other as people, not as competitors in a lifelong race we never even agreed to run. Last week, he called me for advice on how to negotiate a raise. It was a small thing, but it was everything. My parents and I will never have the warm, effortlessly close relationship I once desperately craved. The scars of the past are still there, faint white lines beneath the surface of our new normal. But we have something that is, perhaps, more valuable. It's honest. There are no more games, no more performances, no more pretenses. They know who I am. They know what I will and will not tolerate. And they have chosen, for their own reasons, to respect it. Their motivation might have been born from the fear of their boss, but the result has been a healthier, more authentic connection. Sometimes, when I'm working in my sunny home studio, with our rescue dog sleeping at my feet, I think about that girl who was so desperate for her parents' approval. I feel a wave of compassion for her. She didn't know yet that the validation she was seeking from others could only ever be found within herself. She didn't know that her quiet strength, her integrity, was more powerful than all their loud, empty pronouncements of status. It wasn't a fairy tale ending where everyone magically became better people, but it was a real one. We were all forced to grow and change. And it taught me the most valuable lesson of all, that sometimes you have to be willing to tear everything down to build something that will last. Looking back on the whole insane, stressful, and ultimately life-altering journey, the lesson that stands out the clearest has nothing to do with mansions or billionaires or the sweet, satisfying taste of revenge. The real, enduring lesson is about the architecture of self-worth. For so long, I had allowed my parents to be the sole architects of my identity. They handed me a blueprint when I was born, one that designated my space as small, secondary, and functional. It was a design that told me my dreams were smaller, my value was conditional, and my purpose was to support the grander structure of my brother's ambitions. I spent nearly 3 decades trying to build a life within those cramped and crooked lines, always feeling like I was failing, never understanding that the blueprint itself was fundamentally flawed. It wasn't my construction that was the problem. It was the design. The conflict over the wedding venue wasn't just about a location. It was about me, finally, decisively, throwing out their blueprint and drawing my own. It was a declaration of independence. It was me standing up and saying, I am the architect of my own life, and I am going to build something beautiful and true, even if you lack the vision to see its value. What I didn't anticipate was how terrifying that act of defiance would feel, and how absolutely, unequivocally necessary it would be. You have to be your own architect, your own engineer, and your own builder. I learned that true class, true status, is a quiet, internal quality that has nothing to do with the car you drive, the house you own, or the names on your guest list. I've met people in glass-walled boardrooms who possess less grace and dignity than the elderly volunteers who spend their Saturdays scrubbing kennels at the animal shelter. I've seen more integrity and wisdom in Liam, a public school history teacher, than in executives chasing their next multi-million-dollar bonus. Mr. Alistair Blackwood, a man who could buy and sell my parents 1,000 times over, found value not in my connections or my wealth, but in a simple act of kindness I performed for free. He, and people like him, are drawn to character, not to credentials. My parents were so busy trying to project a superficial image of success that they failed to cultivate the substance of it. They were polishing the brass while the foundations of their own integrity were crumbling. This experience also taught me the most difficult and powerful lesson about boundaries. For years, I believed that being a good daughter meant being an endlessly accommodating one. I thought it meant absorbing their casual dismissals as jokes, swallowing my hurt as being too sensitive, and always showing up with a smile, ready to play my designated part. I confused patience with permission. I let them believe their toxic behavior was acceptable because I never enforced a meaningful consequence. The moment I finally said no, not with anger, but with the quiet, unshakable finality of my actions, was the moment our entire family dynamic was forced to violently recalibrate. Setting a boundary feels like you're initiating a confrontation, but it's actually an act of profound self-preservation. You are preserving your peace, your dignity, and your fundamental right to be treated with respect. It is not your job to manage other people's emotional reactions to your boundaries. It is your job to build the fence, and then to maintain it. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that you cannot wait for other people to give you permission to be happy. You can't wait for them to validate your choices, approve of your dreams, or applaud your successes. You have to be your own champion, your own cheerleader, your own unwavering advocate. You have to believe in the beauty of your trashy venue, even when you're the only one who can see the magic shimmering over the lake. Your joy is not a committee decision. The life you build with the person you love is not a performance for the approval of others. It is your sanctuary, your home, your sacred space. Protect it fiercely. I share this story not to boast about a victory over my parents, but to connect with anyone out there who has ever been made to feel small, overlooked, or undervalued by the very people who were supposed to be their foundation. I want you to know, deep in your bones, that your worth is not negotiable. It is not conditional. It is inherent. It is absolute. And anyone who makes you feel otherwise is not seeing you clearly. Their vision is the problem, not your value. So now, I want to turn it over to this wonderful community. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice that went against your family's deeply ingrained expectations? Have you ever had to stand up for a dream, a partner, or a choice that others dismissed or ridiculed? Tell me about that moment. What did you learn from that experience? And how did it change your relationship with yourself and with them? Please, share your stories in the comments below. Your experience, your words of wisdom, could be the very thing someone else needs to hear today to find their own strength and draw their own blueprint. If this story resonated with you, if it made you cheer or cry or feel seen, please give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button to join our community for more real-life stories about overcoming challenges and finding your power. And don't forget to share this video with someone in your life who might need a reminder that their choices are valid, their dreams matter, and they are the only architect whose opinion truly counts. Remember, the most magnificent, 5-star, A+ venue in the entire world is a life that you build for yourself, on your own terms, filled with unapologetic love and radical authenticity. Thank you for listening.